Well, welcome to episode 23 of the Monocle Banking Podcast, curated by Monocle Solutions, where we go beyond the vaults and virtual wallets to balance the books in the dynamic world of finance. Well, in this episode, we're joined by the Chief Data and Analytics Officer at FirstRand, Dr. Christoph Nieuwoudt, and it's a real pleasure to have you on the show, Chris. I first met you a couple of years ago, I think, in a virtual conversation on Business Day TV. So welcome to the podcast.
Michael, great. Thanks for having me.
Now, I've got to go and I've got to read this CV and I've got to go through it because it's a little unbelievable, actually. You've got a PhD in engineering in machine learning among your 4 degrees. You've consulted with McKinsey. You've worked across 5 continents. You actually co-designed the first computer engineering degree in South Africa at the University of Pretoria, and you chaired the Interbank Credit Committee for the Rescue of African Bank, which, as we know, is the largest bank failure in South African history. You then joined FirstRand back in 2004 in the West Bank division to grow their international business, including an acquisition in the UK, which is now, as we know, Moto Novo, which is part of the Aldermore Group. And then in 2007, you became head of credit. 2010, FNB chief risk officer and FirstRand head of retail credit. And then in 2016, CEO of FNB Consumer in perhaps the most contested space in South African banking. And then in 2020, in the teeth of COVID, FirstRand Chief Data and Analytics Officer, which was a newly created position. That's a seriously impressive CV. Just take me all the way back, though, to growing up and what really were the keys that enabled this kind of journey for you?
So, Michael, when I was 9 years old, my dad bought me a ZX81, well, for me and my brother. So I started programming that. So I guess I always figured that I want to be in the field of computers, computer programming. I actually thought I would become a computer engineer, design computer systems. So that's why I studied electronic engineering. That was really the closest to that. I did honors. I then went to the US. I did a master's in computer engineering at North Carolina State. And then my girlfriend was back home. So I couldn't convince her to join me in the US. So I came back and then I was kind of overqualified. I did a PhD in computer engineering. Well, actually, I guess in pattern recognition, so working with nonlinear systems. Nowadays, if you work with artificial neural networks, everybody calls it AI. We didn't, we thought AI was kind of a marketing term that we didn't really use. And then I guess I was then properly overqualified for the local market. So I joined McKinsey and Company and I ended up working in many continents, serving, a lot of our big international companies that internationalized.
Yeah.
Out of South Africa. They made me travel too much. My wife got pregnant, joined me in Russia. She got pregnant and I came back and then I needed to find a proper job. So
it's very cold in Russia. Sometimes there's nothing much else to do.
I joined the bank and that's really where I guess I've been since.
Yeah. And it's interesting for a number of reasons. But the one is that it was clearly a very clear path and focus on this particular field of computer engineering and what is now become colloquially known as AI. And we talk about generative AI quite freely now, thanks to things like ChatGPT and others. But if you were an early adopter, you could quite clearly see that these large language models, the ability for pattern recognition in computing was really going to transform the world as we know it. In the early days, what did you first see as the big use cases for your specialization when it came to banking?
Yeah, so I was working on AIB even at university, right? So that was image and speech were really the applications. But you're right, AI has had a long history in the bank. So typically more of the nonlinear modeling that we use for fraud and then for fin crime was probably the first area where we really deployed a lot of more advanced models. And you can imagine in South Africa, fraud is a very difficult and a tricky environment. And it's also not that easy to predict it. There's multiple different ways that fraud manifests. So being able to do the kind of anomalous detection and protect customers is a very big part of what gives people trust in banking. Fin crime has become a very big issue in terms of analyzing your customers, where they're getting their money from, where the money is going. And that really has, we've deployed, let's say, small language models in fin crime for a very long time. So for more than 5 years, we've been automating reporting on that. So it actually writes the English reports that you send to the FIC, etc., because it's very laborious for people to do that. We had at one stage, when I was the chief risk officer in FNB, we were employing very big teams to do analysis, and they had to log into 35 different systems to be able to put together a view of a customer. So that's really when our data journey started saying, well, we need to pull this all together. We need to get the data in one place. Data is a very important part of this. But then once you have all this data, how do you put it together and actually automate a risk view on it and even write reports on it, etc.?
What does that data journey look like in a bank as large as FirstRand? Because I often joke that the word silo was invented in a bank. And it used to be that if you wanted to go and talk about your mortgage, you would have to go and chat to one department. And if you want to talk credit card, it's another. And you've almost got to re-log in every time and reintroduce yourself. And that has changed now. But it all came about because of unifying all of this data. And I would suppose a big data lake inside the bank. What did that journey look like for the bank?
So I guess you can imagine FirstRand, the number of brands we have, the federated model that we've always had traditionally meant that there was a high level of fragmentation, if you want to call it, in terms of the different systems that were employed in different areas. But as we've journeyed from that, we've actually had to become much more customer centric. So it started by our segments, or like retail and commercial, and FNB is actually looking after FNB, West Bank, RMB, Private Bank, etc. So that has really been quite a big journey. And then we've become much more platform-centric. So, for example, you would see the app and online banking, etc. is shared across all the different areas in the group. And really building out a platform has been a very big journey for us. And the data analytics plays a critical role in this, because that's the place where we can create a single view of customer across very, very many underlying systems. And we can put together, for example, transact, lend, invest, insure views that are across the enterprise. And just to give you a sense of what the kind of data involved with that is, on Transact, last year, our customers processed 2.5 billion payments, totaling 54 trillion rand.
Wow.
So that's really, for example, our enterprise data asset, our biggest one, our most valuable one, is on the Transact side. Another one outside of, for example, what is the financial pillars that I mentioned would be interactions, where we have more than 2 billion streaming interactions coming onto our data analytics platform every month. And that is across, the biggest source of that would be app, but it's online banking, it's cell phone banking, and then it's all the other channels, including the contact center and where people are face-to-face, etc. So we have a huge amount of data that we have now put together in one logical structure that we can build and put management information, but also deploy models based on that.
And given this, I think conversations, to our earlier point on AI, are unavoidable in this space because machines are just so much better at those kinds of large volume pattern recognition type tasks than humans are. I was looking at Boston Consulting Group. It says AI will supply 20% of revenues this year. So it's not like this is something that's going to happen into the future. If you look at the share price of NVIDIA, for example, it's beyond just hype. When we look at it, is financial services the right industry for AI models, considering the sensitivity of data and the implications of financial accessibility and transparency and increasingly regulation? Or are you finding that it's a difficult space within which to innovate given those constraints?
Yeah, Michael, that's a great question. And we've been asking ourselves that for more than a decade. So if you look at what the hyperscalers have done with providing infrastructure, the Amazon, Microsoft Azure, and now Google as well, in terms of the level of spend and investment they have in AI, it is significant. But I do think that banking still has quite a solid future, and AI is really transformational for modernizing banking. So if you think about the type of AI that was around traditionally, like just neural networks and even then deep learning, which allowed image recognition and so on, that allowed fingerprint recognition, facial recognition when you're registering on the app, reading of documents, that was kind of the earlier wave. Things like reinforcement learning that allows optimization of offers. The generative AI has really unleashed the whole knowledge economy. So because now the models can actually understand language, and not just language, but it can understand code. So coding is a very big application for that as well. It has really invigorated the data analytics community. I mean, we're used to have chief data officers, and then like my role, we chose to say chief data and analytics officer, because actually the model deployments and the automated analytics is a very, very big part of the role. People are now even switching to chief data and AI officers, or just chief AI officers, because the ability of generative AI, even with where things are standing now, the forecasts are that this could impact or automate up to half of knowledge work with the level of technology that is already available. So I always say there's three kinds of jobs that will be around in the future. People designing AI systems, people that are using them to be better at their work, and people that are not impacted by this. So if you are doing manual work, if you're a plumber, electrician, or a surgeon, running a factory, etc., that's less impacted by generative AI. So I think that it is reshaping the knowledge economy significantly. And you would know in journalism as well.
Yeah.
It is having a huge impact.
Yeah. And as a tool, I use it in my day-to-day life in transcription, in writing up that transcript into something that I can put through SEO and have a blurb on. And it's enabling almost a one-person business website development opportunity. With that, you've got to obviously rapidly upskill yourself, and we'll come to the skills challenge that is involved in all of this. But I want to stick with the role of the Chief Data and Analytics Officer, because it's a relatively new C-suite role. And you said that that's already changing. But, what really necessitated that role within the bank? And what does your day-to-day look like? Maybe you can just take us through when you get up in the morning and walk through the door. What does it look like?
Well, we've got a whole team of CDAOs now. So I'm in meetings almost all the time. But I guess that doesn't really give it the right flavor. I mean, what we are really doing is we're pulling together the enterprise data view across the enterprise and, getting the data into data product status so that you have the same view across, let's say, all the transact products, all the lend products, in the invest, insure products, etc., so that you can actually then build and deploy enterprise solutions that are delivering on customer experience, that are providing customers with advice. That is a very big journey for us. The benefit that we have in the group is that we have got such a big range of products. That's actually probably also the difficulty for us is what is the most suitable solution for a customer at a given point in time? How do you optimize their journey? How do you actually hide away all that complexity for a customer in terms of what is sitting behind and what is happening in the bank itself to give the customer that contextual, automated experience 24/7? And even obviously where our customer agents are servicing the customers, how do we enable our agents to be able to optimally give the customer the right financial advice and to sort out, the problems that they may have?
How does that reporting go? Because often in the data community, I think the big challenge has been solving for the right problem and having the business hat on and also having the technical expertise to be able to say, well, we can have this tool or this model or approach it from this angle if you want to solve for that problem. And it's very rare that you find the depth of experience in one individual to be able to combine those things together. So sometimes it just becomes a job of better communicating the value of that data to those who make some of the more strategic business decisions in the company.
That's a great point. So just in terms of the way that we see the CDAO as a strategic role, it is on Exco. It is certainly part of decision making, and that's really what we're doing. Whether that is at a group level, at a segment level, at an individual BU level or product house level, it is really getting people that actually have got the combination of some level of data skills, some level of analytical skills to know what can be done in terms of modeling, but then having a good enough business understanding to be able to help design solutions that address the problem. So often people say, but what is the strategy for CDAO? And I'll say, actually, the strategy is to deliver what the business and what our customers need. Of course, the way that we do it is by centralizing access to data, obviously considering where consent is applicable to meet all the PAPIA requirements in terms of legitimate processing of the information, etc., but to meet those customer solutions. And that is really, whether that is in a retail space, in a commercial space for businesses, or in a corporate space, it's still the same. All of them really need data to be able to function effectively, and being that translator between what people want to have done and what's possible to do, and then how to do that, how to build those into our platform, which we've got information architecture, data modeling, etc., to make sure that we can deliver these solutions that span the enterprise. And data engineering to move data around is actually a whole set of specialized skills that have evolved in this area to be able to do all these things.
Yeah, and I'm taking out my phone here to show you that I'm a long-time F&B customer. And, the one thing that I have found remarkable about the app and its evolution is I've noticed a definite shift over the last few years around the product life stage alignment as to, when the app is suggesting certain kinds of products, be it maybe topping up on life cover because of the arrival of your first child or second child. Now, maybe you need to revisit, your wealth manager. All of these things, clearly speak to what you've been trying to do under the surface. What would you say are some of the big transformational changes that AI has enabled in the business?
Yeah, so on Gen AI, I would say really a lot of that stuff is not even live yet. So that's what's in production. But I'm happy to talk through a couple of the big ones. The first no-brainer for banks across the world is to actually be better at coding. So that doesn't seem very sexy, but if you think that the Gen AI is good at English or they're doing, Shakespeare, it's actually really, really good at Java and Python and C and the likes. So getting that, and it's not just writing code, but it's even writing business specifications, functional specifications. It is understanding how things can be implemented. It's refactoring existing code, documenting code. Yes, it is writing code. It is writing, developing test samples for code, etc. So that is just a microcosm of an area that's in every single financial institution that will really accelerate our ability to deliver solutions. But then clearly what people want to see is the customer-facing engine. So what we have on the app today is still the previous generation. The next generation is going to be significantly more contextual with very good generative AI summaries and also better integration into business functions that solve for your needs, including advice is a very big area that we are developing. So, with what we've seen is these are really the things that people are working on. These are the ones that have got big customer impact.
And I'd imagine you would build that capability in-house because one of the concerns with something like a ChatGPT is, the proprietary data that you're inputting into the model and, what you sign out of in the T's and C's and that kind of thing. How do you handle customer privacy and data security on this journey?
Absolutely. So I guess like many other institutions, we didn't allow our staff from bank systems. You can't access ChatGPT. But we have an internal FNB GPT, FirstRand GPT across the group that you can ask questions. So if you have questions on any HR policies, risk compliance, etc., we already codified the internal data and it will give you an accurate internal data. So like you say, there's multiple issues with these large language models that were trained on external data. The first one was obviously privacy was not guaranteed. So if you're implementing this, it has to be in a private cloud environment where this data cannot be used by whoever is hosting it. You could self-host it as well. But if you're doing it on Azure or on Google Cloud, they absolutely are not legally allowed to access the data, and that is protected from a cybersecurity perspective. It is ring-fenced. Okay, so now that you've addressed privacy, the big issue is really the accuracy. Because these models that are trained on outside data, they don't have your internal data. So that is where you typically using RAG, retrieval augmented generation. That is really the most used framework in generative AI, where you are codifying your internal data that is in English and text, turning that into a vector database that actually represents it in the way that the LLMs can really absorb that information. And then when you ask it questions or you ask it to compare things, etc., this data is internal data sources. You can reference through to the actual documents,
right,
if it is giving you advice or answers, etc. And that is really how you build that level of trust and accuracy in it. Obviously, harmful content would be another factor. So there are so many filters that are built on top of the models nowadays to make sure that it addresses all kinds of prompt injection attacks and whatever else. Because you can imagine whether it happens by accident or people deliberately want to get your bot to give an answer that will be inappropriate. You have to protect the system against that. So there are technical architectural ways of addressing all of that. And you have to if you want to have a competent solution.
Yeah, and I guess to your point there on the other side, bad actors, I'm sure, are going to be utilizing this technology to create new fraud threats or other cyber threats into your system. So now you've got to stay one step ahead of that as well.
Yeah, so I think deepfakes, we're seeing internationally, that has grown significantly. That's not been such an issue in South Africa yet that we've seen. But clearly, they're not necessarily targeting the bank directly. They're targeting employees of companies, and they're impersonating the CEO of the company. They will get then staff in the company to make payments. And from a bank side, it all looks completely legitimate. But they've actually, they subverted those roles in business. Another example would be the business email compromise that existed before this, where they're just faking the emails. And sometimes they're actually sending that email from the solicitor's office, from the lawyer's office. It tells you to pay this amount, your deposit for the house. Proper big amount. It's coming from the right email address and everything, but it's been intercepted. So the bank has got to stay ahead of this. So clearly, from a data perspective, I always say, well, if the data and the models is the problem, it's also the solution. So in this case, profiling not just your own customer base, but any target recipient of money. That would not be different from your card is swiped anywhere across the world. It's like, okay, did Michael Avery really, is he in the US now? Is he swiping his card there? Is he really buying this thing? It doesn't make any sense. You've got to be pretty smart in terms of the way that you model fraud to be able to get around these things, because we have to take into account that, your account could be compromised.
Yeah.
This may not be you doing this, and if it looks out of the ordinary, picking that up quickly is quite important. So engendering the trust in the system is very, very important. Banks work on trust. If people didn't trust us, they wouldn't give us, in South Africa, like R1 trillion that we are using to lend.
Yeah.
So it is absolutely critical.
I had experience of that firsthand with an automated call based on a transaction that was executed early in the morning, which is outside of my normal behavior. But it was offshore looking for a birthday present. And it was just a friendly call, Mr. Avery, just to make sure, is this you? Press 1 or 2. And it was me, fortunately, but it was reassuring to know that there's a system in the background that understands the patterns of my behavior that was, ensuring that everything is safe. So it is already, I can verify it's being deployed. When it comes to things like predictive analytics, that's also fascinating. Daniel Saxenberg, I heard, give a talk recently about using AI to predict default, for example. And there's some weird parameters around what time of day of the week and what day of the week that you apply for a loan that can predict your default likelihood, for example. Are you using predictive analytics in your lending practices and your loan practices inside the bank?
Yeah, so like I said, I guess in some areas like fraud and even fin crime, probably we use more AI models. The lending side, provision and capital models, highly regulated. Okay, so I guess what we've been doing there for a very long time, and I guess all banks across the world, use more simple techniques that are better explainable, and being able to address the bias in the models and the fairness of the models and explainability means that has not been globally the forefront of innovation. But that said, we are using AI-based features in many of our credit decisioning processes. So yes, the behavioral factors are certainly coming to the fore more and more in like our current generation. We call them Generation 4 scorecards. That doesn't mean anything to anyone else than us. But really, that's where we have incorporated the enterprise level behavioral data on customers as well into credit decisioning systems. So they are part of the decisioning process, but they play, let's say, a relatively smaller role.
Yeah.
They are not using generative AI. Nowadays, everything is AI. So let's say you have a lot of features. You may use principal component analysis, other mathematical techniques to simplify the data sets and to extract what is really relevant for a given decision, etc. But yes, those are coming to the fore more and more. And yes, we do think that the opportunity to drive financial inclusion is really big using alternative data. So you may not know, and our audience may not know, but let's say a lot of customers that have never borrowed before, they have no credit track record. They would be classified as thin file customers. If they apply for credit, they don't credit because they've never had credit. So they've never had a store card or anything. Now, that actually is patently unfair. And, there's lots of other characteristics that one can use. So using data from retailers, from telcos, etc., that can really unlock financial inclusion for a large segment of customers that would not really pass the traditional FICO score, as people would talk about it.
Yeah, and that's very exciting because financial inclusion, if you broaden that base, we're talking about more people able to access loans to start small and micro businesses, to access loans for educating their children, for all kinds of transformative behaviors. What does that mean from the bank's perspective in terms of tapping into those external third-party data sources?
Yeah, that is very tricky. I mean, I'm not going to go into the details of that, but exactly being able to do that in a way that preserves the privacy of customers, that addresses the ability of customers to give consent to how the data is used from the parties, etc. There is actually quite a lot of legal aspects of that you have to navigate and be quite happy from a reputational perspective. And then there's the technical aspects, like I mentioned, words like privacy preserving, etc., sharing of information to get that information. These are not this would not be a traditional bureau per se in that sense, but then ensuring that your customer's data does not get shared externally in order to be able to get the reply back. That is really where it becomes quite technical in terms of how the solutions are implemented. And that's where innovation also comes to play.
That's where the devil is in the data detail. When it comes to the skills required, and we did mention it earlier, obviously data and analytics require significant technical skills, which South Africa struggles to produce in volumes. And often look at our unemployment crisis, and I think we have more of a skills crisis than an unemployment crisis in the country. How do you cope with the skills shortage? And from a broader kind of macro perspective, if you were advising government or the industry, what are the long-term panaceas for the shortage? What can we do to tap into this and turn it into an opportunity?
Yeah, so just to start off by saying that I do think our universities are still generating very high quality grads. So in the areas of engineering, mathematics, statistics, actuarial science, computer science, and then a lot of other, economics, econometrics, etc. There's a lot of areas where there are people that learn how to code and that are, understand enough of data and statistics and the application thereof to get gainful employment. So I think we are in a good shape with that. We directly work with a number of universities. We have foundations with a number of them. We try to influence the programs in terms of what kind of skills we want. Now, of course, in my case, in my control or my oversight, we have 2,000 staff that are doing data analytics. So that's grown quite a bit from what it was a few years ago. I think our growth is not probably accelerating, but we are still every year, we would take a couple of hundred people just to replace some level of churn that is happening in the industry. But there is still skills. But I completely agree with you. Actually, it starts with early childhood development. If you get that right, the ability of kids to learn at school and learn, obviously, language, including native language, but then subjects like mathematics is critical because it's actually almost impossible to learn these things yourself. These models are really smart, but try and learn advanced statistics on your own. It is challenging enough to study it at university. So some of these things, you have to build a pipeline.
Yeah.
If you want to win in this game, you have to build a pipeline. And this pipeline you have to build from early on. You can't just start late. I do think that there is a lot of training that we have to do now. So in fairness, even with our own staff, how many of our staff, I was always joking this, Dr. Mark Nasilla, one of my colleagues, he's got a PhD in AI as well. And I'm like, okay, when this Gen AI thing became big, I said, Mark, okay, so who of your PhDs are going to teach us how to use, how these Gen AI, these transformer neural networks work and how we apply it? And he said, well, actually, they all got their PhDs like 5 years ago. So they all predate the generation, the new generative AI model. So we got to teach even our advanced people we have to learn again. We have to learn new computer languages, Python, etc.
But do you think that's going to be a key attribute of surviving in this world is hyper agility in learning and to be able to continually learn and relearn as this technology evolves and unlocks new areas that we're not even thinking of in our conversation today?
Absolutely. I think if you can't program Python, you don't even understand if you're like working on the leading frameworks on this. So I was at Google Next some 3 weeks ago. So the founder of LangChain, which LangChain is like the leading open source agentic framework for LLMs. Okay, sorry for using complex words, but these are the agents that control and drive how these large language models will generate answers for you. And he started that business 2 years ago. So that was September 22.
Wow.
And they are trying to figure out how to create these frameworks for how you control the agents. And the stuff is all, they will give you code in Python. They don't necessarily give you a manual. Of course, you can ask the LLMs themselves because they become smart at this. But yes, you're right. This is kind of hyper learning that's happening all the time.
But for the banks, can it code in COBOL, I guess, is some of the, I was chatting to Paul Morley of Nedbank a couple of weeks ago and it's still very much integrated into some of the core systems. COBOL, IBM, as we know, very, very sound language, but you can't find that many people that can code in a language that was designed in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, absolutely. So part of a big aim from my side of developing our data analytics infrastructure, our platform across the group was to decouple what we're doing from what is happening in the back-end system. So be they COBOL-based mainframe systems or be they whatever other systems, we can deploy customer-facing solutions that are really state-of-the-art, that are not dependent on where the debits and credits are processed. But like you say, at the same time, obviously, there is a need to modernize. That is always there. This technology, we are certainly investigating how, like I mentioned before on our Coder program, it can absolutely help you to transform, to move applications off mainframe, off COBOL environments that reflect an understanding of what that code is exactly doing, and to accelerate that process. It has really accelerated what is possible in terms of renewal of code environments. And yes, you do not need to learn the COBOL to the same extent anymore, because these models actually express understanding across all of these languages, including English, right? Because you're telling it in English what to write. Now it writes SQL code, runs it in a database, and gives you the answer that you want.
I guess there is a shortage when it comes to native vernacular languages in Africa. And across the board, there needs to be a lot of work done in just producing, more data for those models to learn from and train off of. If we were to broaden, the reach of this in Zulu or isiXhosa or Venda or whatever.
That's a great point. The University of Pretoria, where I did my PhD, they have got a big program on addressing native language modeling. And it's really about making sure that there are curated corpuses of language. If you think about it, Wikipedia was in many ways the source that we used for global information until these large language models really assimilated all of that knowledge and a lot more. And, the second biggest corpus in South Africa on Wikipedia is actually Afrikaans. And then Xhosa and isiZulu is actually lagging that. That does make it harder to develop the models in these languages. But I do think that, yes, there is significant scope for that. If you're government and you want to revolutionize education, I don't know, you've played with these models. I mean, these models can do from entry level, learning your first few words up to PhD level. They can do, rocket science, nuclear science. But can they do that? And can they do that in vernacular? I think it's infinitely doable.
Yeah.
But that would take quite a lot of commitment from government to say, look here, we're going to invest in education and put tools to give our students the best education that we can do. And I do think this can be transformational in education.
A huge opportunity, but it needs that political will. We've just seen the publication of our draft AI strategy, so that's quite interesting. But as we are running out of time, Christoph, I think we got a bit carried away there. It's been fantastic getting your insights into this really nascent area, but transformational area, as we've seen. For those looking to pursue a career in data science, listening to all of this within the banking sector, what is your advice? What are the skills and what are the pathways that you believe will be most crucial in the next, I'm not even going to say 10 years, in the next 5 years?
The first point is, if you want to design and build these systems, then clearly more of a programming approach, including engineering, is really fantastic, because that has the design components, mathematics, statistics, computer science. That is really if you want to be a professional in the field of data and analytics. However, like I said before, I think virtually every other industry is going to get transformed by this. And this gives a great opportunity for new people entering the market. If you are a lawyer or even a medical doctor or an educator, those fields are going to be transformed by this technology, and many others as well. I'm just mentioning a few. So if you can take some of the coursework that relates to this so that you have an understanding of what it can do, and you get to leverage that into the workplace, you could really have a very big impact at a young age, because you are open to the new ideas and you understand how to use it. So that's where I do think, we're still taking in a lot of grads, because if somebody, I'm like, okay, I've been with the bank forever, but my age, we'd have to teach them anyway, the new tricks.
Yeah.
So, you might as well also teach younger people. So I do think it's a fantastic opportunity. And like I wouldn't limit you to say you have to study this, but you have to consider how it will impact the profession and how you would become proficient, like you are, at using technology, how you are going to execute your profession. Unless you are in a profession that's not really impacted by generative AI, then you probably still have a runway to be a bit in denial.
And that's a whole other rabbit hole we can go down with regards to government strategy, because I think we need to put a lot more focus on those professions, the bricklayers, plumbers, and we need so many of them if you just look at the state of our infrastructure. But Chris, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much. Chief Data and Analytics Officer at FirstRand, Christoph Nieuwoudt, thank you so much for sharing your data journey with us here on the Monocle Banking Podcast.
It's a pleasure, Michael. Thanks.
Well, as you heard, Christoph believes that if you're a poor adopter of technology and you've got lagging practices, I think as an individual, you might be suffering into the future. Certainly as an organization, you're not going to remain competitive. Technology clearly allowing the FirstRand Group to be far more productive, enabling them to hire more employees and do more with those employees as well. Well, that wraps up this week's episode of the Monocle Banking Podcast. Before we go, don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast. I'd like to thank you again for tuning in, and until next time, let's all keep on building the South Africa that we all believe in. Take care.